The first vision struck like lightning on a clear day, a sudden flash of horror that shattered my mundane morning. I was standing in line at the cafe, distractedly scrolling through my phone, when the world around me seemed to tilt. The vibrant hum of conversation faded into an eerie silence, and the air grew heavy, pressing against my skin. I blinked, and the cafe dissolved. In its place was a scene so vivid, so tangible, that it felt like I'd stepped into another life. I saw Max, my best friend since childhood, standing at the edge of a crumbling bridge. His face was pale, twisted in an expression of sheer terror, as if he were staring into something only he could see. Shadows danced around him. Not human shadows, but amorphous, writhing shapes that seemed alive, exuding an inexplicable malice. The air crackled with tension, and then he fell. I snapped back to the cafe, my chest heaving. The barista was staring at me, her hand frozen mid-reach for my cup. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice distant, as if muffled by thick glass. I nodded stiffly, muttered something about needing air, and stumbled outside. The cool breeze hit my face, but it did little to calm the storm inside me. My hands trembled as I clutched my phone. I needed to tell Max. But what could I even say? The vision didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. Yet the memory of it clung to me, vivid and unshakable. The texture of the bridge's cracked concrete, the suffocating presence of those shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just some strange daydream. The next few days passed in a haze. Max, oblivious to my inner turmoil, remained his usual upbeat self. He laughed off my clumsy attempts to warn him about something bad, without sounding unhinged. But the visions didn't stop. Each one was sharper than the last. They came in unexpected bursts, in the middle of a work meeting, while brushing my teeth, even during sleep. I'd see the same scene unfold. Max on the bridge, the encroaching darkness, the inevitable fall. Each time, the sense of dread grew stronger, as if the universe itself were tightening a noose around him. Then, one evening, a letter arrived. There was no return address, only my name scrawled in elegant, almost archaic handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded with meticulous precision. The words were printed in neat serif font. "Discover the truth. Midnight tomorrow. Observatory 9, Hillside Road." The observatory. I hadn't thought about that place in years. It had been abandoned for decades, a relic of some forgotten research project. Locals whispered about the strange experiments conducted there, but I'd always dismissed the stories as urban legends. Now I wasn't so sure. The visions, the letter, it couldn't be a coincidence. Whatever was happening, it had drawn me into its orbit, and it was pulling me closer to the edge. The observatory loomed against the night sky, its dome silhouetted by a pale crescent moon. The building exuded an aura of neglect, its once pristine facade marred by time and weather. Ivy coiled around the base, clinging to the cracked walls like skeletal fingers. A single light flickered near the entrance, casting long, jagged shadows that danced across the ground. I hesitated on the threshold, clutching the letter in my hand. The air was eerily still, as though the world itself were holding its breath. A sense of unease slithered through me, but I pushed the door open. The creak echoed unnaturally, amplifying into a sound that seemed to ripple through the hollow structure. The interior smelled of damp wood and rust, and every step I took stirred up motes of dust that hung suspended in the weak beam of my flashlight. I followed the letter's instructions to the lecture hall, an expansive room dominated by a massive circular skylight. The shattered glass above allowed the moonlight to spill in, pooling on the floor in a silvery glow. Rows of decrepit seats lined the walls, their fabric frayed and discolored, as if the room had been frozen in the aftermath of some unseen calamity. The centerpiece of the room was a massive blackboard, its surface covered in an intricate maze of equations and diagrams. They spiraled out from a central phrase, written in bold white chalk: "What is seen cannot be unseen." A chill prickled the back of my neck. "Welcome," a voice rasped, startling me. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my grip. The figure that emerged from the shadows was thin and angular, their face obscured by the hood of a tattered coat. Their presence was unsettling, like they didn't quite belong in this world. "You've seen it, haven't you?" the figure asked, their voice dripping with certainty. My mouth was dry. "Seen what?" "The end," they whispered, stepping closer. "The bridge, the fall. You saw it because you were meant to." "How do you know about that?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. They didn't answer. Instead, they gestured to the blackboard. This place was built to see beyond, to peer into the fractures of time, the echoes of what might be, and sometimes, what must be. "What do you mean, what must be?" My heart pounded as the words hung heavy in the air. "You can't stop it," they said simply, their voice hollow. "But you can learn why." Before I could press further, a strange sound filled the room, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like raindrops falling on glass. But there was no rain. The figure turned abruptly, vanishing into the shadows. "Wait!" I called, but they were gone. The tapping grew louder, echoing through the hall. I turned toward the source, toward the blackboard, and froze. The equations had changed. The spirals now radiated outward, their lines converging on a new phrase, scrawled hastily, as if by an unseen hand. "Time watches all." The blackboard's message seared itself into my mind. Time watches all. I could barely tear my eyes from it, the phrase seeming to pulse with a life of its own. The room felt heavier now, the air thick and oppressive, as though the very fabric of reality had shifted. The faint tapping sound continued, though it had grown erratic, almost frantic, like fingers drumming on the edge of the universe. I turned away from the blackboard, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. My instincts screamed at me to leave the observatory, to escape its suffocating aura, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. The whispers in the air grew louder, indistinct yet insistent, like voices speaking from just out of reach. And then I saw it, a door at the far end of the lecture hall, its outline barely visible in the dim light. It wasn't on the schematics I remembered from years ago. This door was new, or perhaps something that had always been hidden. As I approached, I noticed strange symbols etched into the wood, their sharp angles and spirals vaguely familiar, as though I had glimpsed them before in a dream. The door creaked open at my touch, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. The faint tapping echoed from below, beckoning me deeper into the bowels of the observatory. I hesitated, gripping the banister to steady myself. "Learn why," the figure's voice echoed in my memory. I descended, each step resonating like a drumbeat, my flashlight beam slicing through the dense shadows. The air grew colder with every step, the silence punctuated by the occasional groan of the ancient building settling. The staircase ended in a small chamber, its walls plastered in faded, crumbling posters. The largest one caught my eye, an announcement for a lecture series featuring a guest speaker named Dr. Elias Rourke. The topic, temporal fractures and the fabric of reality. A chill ran down my spine. Dr. Rourke's name was etched into local lore. He was the man responsible for the experiments at the observatory, attempts to glimpse possible futures by distorting time itself. Rumors swirled about his disappearance decades ago, the project abruptly abandoned and sealed off. My flashlight illuminated a desk in the center of the room. On it lay a notebook, its leather cover cracked with age. I flipped it open, the brittle pages crumbling slightly at the edges. Rourke's Scrawled notes filled every inch, his handwriting growing more erratic as the entries progressed. June 12th. The device works. The visions are fleeting but vivid. We've glimpsed what lies ahead. June 24th. Time resists our intrusion. The fractures are widening. Unintended echoes emerge. Shadows. Whispers. They watch us. July 1st. The warnings are clear. We must stop before it's too late. The bridge. The fall. A path that cannot be changed. My breath hitched. The bridge. The fall. The same words from my visions. A sudden hum filled the air, low and resonant, vibrating through the walls. My flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering weakly before plunging me into darkness. Panic surged, but before I could react, the notebook's pages began to turn on their own, stopping abruptly on a single, haunting entry. July 14th. The fractures have become sentient. They whisper promises, threats, truths. Time watches all. I fear it is too late to undo what we have seen. The hum grew louder, a deep, thrumming pulse that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, as the notebook slammed shut. And then I saw it, a faint, glowing outline on the far wall. It was another door, barely perceptible, its edges shimmering with a strange, otherworldly light. The glowing door drew me forward, its faint luminescence casting eerie patterns on the walls. My pulse quickened as I reached out to touch it. The surface was smooth and cool, humming faintly beneath my fingers. When I pushed, the door swung open silently, revealing a cavernous room bathed in an unnatural blue light. The centerpiece of the room was a massive apparatus, a hulking machine of steel and glass, its surface bristling with wires and gears. At its core was a spinning orb, pulsing with energy that seemed alive. It cast shifting shadows across the walls, which were covered in diagrams and equations that spiraled outward like fractals. The tapping sound was louder here, rhythmic and deliberate. I scanned the room, my eyes drawn to a figure slumped against the far wall. It was a mannequin, its hollow eyes staring blankly ahead. The relief I felt at seeing it wasn't human, was fleeting. Its position mirrored Max's stance in my visions, as if frozen mid-scream. I approached the machine, its energy prickling my skin. A control panel jutted out from its side, covered in switches and dials. A notebook rested on the console, open to a page filled with cryptic instructions. Scrawled in large, jagged letters across the top were the words, "To alter the fracture, calibrate the dials, choose wisely." The urgency of the message was unmistakable. My visions, Rourke's notes, it all pointed to this machine. Was this the source of my glimpses into the future? And if so, could I use it to stop what I'd seen? I reached for the dials, my fingers trembling. The machine seemed to react, the orb spinning faster, its glow intensifying. A voice, soft, melodic, whispered from the air around me. "You cannot change what must be." I froze, glancing around the room. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, its tone neither threatening nor comforting. "You can only delay," it continued. "The fracture will correct itself." "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. There was no response, only the pulsing hum of the machine. The mannequin across the room seemed to shift imperceptibly, its empty gaze almost accusatory. Desperation surged through me. I turned the dials, each twist filling the room with a resonant hum. The orb flickered erratically, casting fragmented images across the walls, futures, possibilities, fragments of lives unspooling like threads. Max appeared in one image, standing on the bridge, his face frozen in terror. In another, he was laughing, the danger seemingly averted. But as I turned the final dial, the visions began to overlap. merging into a kaleidoscope of shifting realities. The room trembled, the orb's light growing blinding. "You are out of time," the voice whispered. And then the machine fell silent. The orb stopped spinning, its glow fading to nothing. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding. The fracture was still there. I could feel it. The question was, had I done enough to change the outcome? Or had I simply delayed the inevitable? The silence that followed was suffocating, an emptiness so vast it felt as though the universe itself had paused. The machine's orb no longer pulsed with light, its once living energy now dormant. Shadows stretched across the room, twisted and elongated, as if reluctant to recede despite the absence of light. I exhaled a shaky breath, my chest tight with exhaustion and dread. Had I succeeded? Had I done enough to stop the fracture, to save Max? The thought was a faint flicker of hope in an otherwise oppressive void. Then the whispers began again. Faint at first, like distant voices carried on the wind. They swirled through the air, growing louder, overlapping until they became a chorus of murmurs. I couldn't make out the words, but their tone was clear. Disapproval, frustration, and something else. Anticipation. The glow returned to the orb, faint and uneven, like the last embers of a dying fire. But it wasn't alone. The walls shimmered, the air around me vibrating with unseen energy. From the corner of my eye, I saw the mannequin shift again, its blank face tilted slightly toward me. It was no longer a mannequin. The figure's hollow eyes now brimmed with a faint blue light, their eerie glow piercing the darkness. Its body, once rigid and lifeless, moved with unsettling fluidity, as though testing the limits of its newfound mobility. The tapping resumed, louder and sharper, echoing like a countdown. "You have meddled where you should not," the melodic voice returned, louder this time, filling the room. It emanated from everywhere, weaving through the shadows like a living thing. The fracture watches, and it remembers. What does that mean? My voice cracked, the question tumbling out in a frantic gasp. Did I stop it? Did I change anything? The orb flared, and the shadows around me seemed to ripple in response. The walls shimmered like water, their surfaces rippling with distorted images, scenes that played out in fragmented flashes. I saw Max standing on the bridge again, but something was different. The shadows surrounding him were fewer, thinner, as if they had been weakened. He looked over his shoulder, his face no longer contorted in terror, but marked with grim determination. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. I did it, I whispered, clinging to the sight like a lifeline. He's safe. The voice responded with a low, resonant hum, devoid of triumph or defeat. Did you? Or have you merely delayed the inevitable? The images on the walls flickered violently, one scene bleeding into the next. In one, Max stood unscathed, his shadowed assailants retreating into the void. In another, the bridge crumbled beneath his feet, the outcome unchanged. Yet another showed him walking away from the bridge entirely, his fate diverging into the unknown. Time itself fractured before me, each possibility tearing at the edges of reality. The room trembled, the orb's glow flickering chaotically. Reality is not a single thread, the voice intoned. It is a tapestry, woven with infinite possibilities. Pull at one thread and others unravel. I had to try, I said, my voice trembling. I couldn't just do nothing. And now, you have seen what cannot be unseen, the voice replied, neither condemning nor comforting. But the fracture will persist. It always does. The orb dimmed, the walls falling still. The figure across the room stood frozen once more, its faint glow fading to nothing. The whispers subsided, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt alive. A door appeared before me, not the glowing one from earlier, but a simple wooden door, its surface unmarked. It opened with a soft creak, revealing the observatory's main hall bathed in pale moonlight. I stepped through, my legs trembling. The door closed behind me, the weight of the night pressing heavily on my shoulders. Outside, the world seemed unchanged, the observatory silent and still, as though the events within had never happened. But I knew better. As I walked into the night, I checked my phone, my hands unsteady. A single text from Max waited on the screen, sent mere minutes ago. "Saw your missed calls. All good here. What's up?" Relief flooded through me, but it was laced with unease. I wanted to believe that I had made a difference, that Max's fate had been altered. But the words of the voice lingered, chilling and inescapable. The fracture remembers. Above, the moon hung low in the sky, its pale light casting long, uneven shadows on the ground. As I glanced back at the observatory, I saw a faint flicker of blue light through the shattered skylight. The orb's pulse was weak but steady, a reminder that the fracture was never truly gone. The echoes of that night would follow me forever, a reminder of what I had glimpsed. Not just a possible future, but the fragile web of time itself, forever shifting, forever watching. I turned away, walking into the darkness with a singular certainty. Somewhere the fracture still waits, and so does time.